terms of ChatGPT, that was the largest uptake of any technology in history. So there are 8 billion people in the world, 5 billion people have access to the internet, and 1 billion people use this platform. So 1 in 5 people in the world with access to the internet. Like it's ridiculous. We haven't seen numbers like that in such a short space of time.
Welcome to Future Fit Leadership, a podcast for emerging, experienced and executive leaders to build community, grow capability and future focus their career pathways. There has been a global shift in how we lead, and our conversations with leaders and executives explores the skills, strategies and mindsets that is needed to thrive in this ever-evolving landscape of the future. So whether you are a seasoned executive, an aspiring leader, or simply curious about the future of leadership, we are here to give you practical insights to unlock your potential, change the status quo, and break open our assumptions on how work works. Produced in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives, Future Fit Leadership is your place for bite-sized learning for executives hungry to make a change. Hello and welcome to Future Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Sadhna Smiles, and I hope wherever you are listening to this podcast, you are well. Have you stopped and reflected on what 2023 was about and some of the key milestones we all went through? I was reading a recent report from our guest today, and it made me realize that 2023 was a big year. Let me share some of the milestones that I read on his report. WHO declared COVID was no longer a health emergency. ChatGPT became the fastest adopted technology. Twitter rebranded to X. We got a king, which does sound a little bit weird, but we did. Barbie was released, and thank God, because we could all own wearing pink again. And then, of course, there was the Taylor Swift impact on global economies and the incredible concerts that we've all watched and followed on social media. And of course, sadly, the war in Ukraine continued. And in October, we saw a catastrophic escalation of the Palestinian and Israeli conflict. So what's in store for 2024 and beyond? Well, this year, we've seen over 70 countries go to the polls. It's also seeing the emergence of the far right in many places, climate change, the move to net zero commitments, and much more. So I reached out to Dr. Ben Hamer to come onto our podcast and discuss these topics and much more. Ben is a futurist, and no, he doesn't have a crystal ball. In fact, you will hear how he became a futurist in this conversation. He is also a speaker, advisor, author, and has endless curiosity and is always seeking to understand the world around him. He has undertaken work and research around the world, including time spent leading critical projects for the World Economic Forum, as well as a visiting scholar at Yale University. He is an adjunct professor at Edith Cowan University and a board member for the Australian HR Institute, where he was appointed as the youngest non-executive director in the organisation's history, as well as being on the board of Netball New South Wales. Ben has got an energetic personality, and you'll be able to feel his energy in the conversation with us. It is an absolutely fascinating conversation where we do cover many topics. In fact, Ben does mention how much I have jumped around in this conversation because we cover everything from politics to technology to climate change to food changes and robotics and 3D printing. I promise you, it is a conversation where we cover a number of things, and each one will make you think and give you goosebumps. Ben has been brought to us today by Saxton Speakers. Please enjoy this fabulous conversation with Dr. Ben Hamer. Hello, Ben. Welcome to Future Fit Leadership. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm a little bit not worried, but I don't really know what way we're going to go with this podcast. So looking forward to the chat.
You're the futurist. You should know where we're going with this podcast, right?
That's the thing, as a futurist, it's so broad, right? So you can take it any direction that you want to. So that's where it gets, my anxiety starts to peak a little bit.
And you have your own podcast. So you're on the other chair today, which I know can be sometimes very daunting, hey, because I've done that before when you are not the asking the questions, but answering it, you kind of go, this is sitting in the other chair and it's not so comfortable.
Oh, I don't mind it. I mean, you kind of get to swan in and swan out, right? So I don't have to pull it together and make sure that the narrative flows. You've got the hard job.
That's true. So now, Ben, what I always do in my podcast so that my listeners get an idea, I always ask for a bit of a background of people who come on the show, maybe share something that people don't know about you or just generally your background.
Okay, so my background. I'm originally from Perth, so
We
born
won't
and
hold that against you.
so like living in Sydney now, people are like, "Oh, do they have colour TV over there yet?" So
It's like a whole different country to Australia in Perth.
I mean, as far as flight times are concerned,
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, people much prefer to go to Bali than Sydney, and it's cheaper and quicker. And so I've definitely copped that. But no, so I've been in Sydney, living here for about 10 years now. I'm a futurist, as we've said. So for me, my work is really about what are the trends shaping the way that we live, work, and play in the future, and what it means for organizations and their people. And then something that's not work related. So I play elite level netball. So for
Ew.
South Wales and Australia.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit different. Gives me a little bit of balance and an excuse to go to the gym so I don't put on too much weight, working from home and getting into the snack cupboard.
How do you become a futurist? And I have to tell my listeners who don't see the video of this, apart from my promo rolls, Ben's not sitting here with a crystal ball in front of him and, with a weird tent and long hair and some, colorful clothes on. He definitely isn't that. But how do you actually become a futurist?
Yeah, so look, it's definitely still an emerging discipline in the sense that, it's not like a, chartered accountant or engineers where you go through the rigorous process. It's still something that's being defined. But the way that I went through it, I did my study through the Institute for the Future, which is they're an education and provider and think tank based in the US and just out of Silicon Valley. And so I did my study with them. After that, I then went through the future school to get certified. So you kind of, do your exam and pass, hopefully, and pass I did. And then once you sort of ticked a few boxes around study, around, certification or having proven that you've worked enough in the field, whether that's through keynotes or consulting work, you then get admitted into the Association of Professional Futurists. And so I started out working within HR and doing workforce planning and workforce strategy. And that sort of evolved into looking at the future of work. So how work was evolving over the next 5 or so years. And I kind of during lockdown wanted to go a little bit broader beyond that. So that was my lockdown project, was getting doing my study, getting certified, and have been working as a full-time futurist ever since.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but from my understanding of the research that I've done, it's really looking at trends and being able to predict what potentially may happen or how people are going to react based on trends that are occurring or have occurred in the past. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, so like a futurist doesn't predict anything because obviously the future isn't predictable, and any futurist who's worth their money will tell you that. As much as when I do keynotes and people ask me should they be investing in crypto and all these other bits and pieces, I'm like, that is not what I do. But really, as you said, it's keeping an eye out for signals of change, which are essentially trends, and then looking at, if that plays out into the future, what will happen, who wins, who loses, is it the kind of future that we want to work towards or one we want to avoid? And so using that kind of practice, whether it's in sort of people's day-to-day lives or in their work, or for organizations when they're developing strategies for where they want to take their business over the next 3, 5, and 10 years.
I want to look a little bit backwards with you before we start to look forwards. And we are halfway through 2024. So, I'd love to talk a little bit about 2025 as well. But 2023 and certainly the first half of 24 has been massive. And we could probably list, 50, 100 things that really stood out for a number of people. But what were your key standouts for 2023?
Oh, the biggest one was AI, like 100%.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where it's been building in the background for a while, right? Like a lot of people feel like it came out of nowhere, but you go back almost 30 years ago to 1997, and that's where we saw AI beat the world chess champion for the first time. So already pretty sophisticated back then, but in November 2022, we saw ChatGPT get launched, and that was the beginning of this wave of just everything AI. And so, in terms of ChatGPT, that was the largest uptake of any technology in history. So, there are 8 billion people in the world, 5 billion people have access to the internet, and 1 billion people use this platform. So, 1 in 5 people in the world with access to the internet. Like it's ridiculous. We haven't seen numbers like that in such a short space of time. And then there's just been any number of other platforms and tools and AI powered technologies that have come about, whether or not that's videos of Johnny Cash singing Barbie Girl that are AI generated, or the Met Gala where Katy Perry and Lady Gaga. But then obviously that sort of also moved into some not so good spaces, like with what we see with deepfake pornography and the Australian government trying to get on the front foot around that. And so that's definitely been the biggest kind of technology, I think, or sort of biggest impact for 2023. I think that a lot of organizations are sort of now moving beyond looking at it as something of a gimmick. Like, I think a lot of people have used it either to ask what they should have for dinner tonight with these 4 ingredients in their fridge, or use it as like a glorified search engine. But now we're starting to get a feel for how we can actually embed it as part of our day-to-day work. So I would say that's the biggest. The other thing probably besides that, and something that's sort of on the other end, so quite removed from technology, I would say is what we're seeing around geopolitical conflicts. The war in Ukraine has been going for a couple of years now. We saw the Palestine-Israeli conflict from October 7, and that's having some pretty profound impacts around consumer confidence, around supply chains. And as we go into 2024, it's one of the biggest years on record for people around the world voting. So the highest number of people going to the polls. India has had a massive count that spans weeks. We've seen France call a snap election. We've got the US election coming up. Iran had a surprise election, I think it was, after their president was killed. And so that in and of itself, while we're seeing all of this geopolitical conflict goes on, like that all has a say in, do we swing right? Do we swing left? What does that mean for the economy and sort of international relations?
And of course, there was Taylor Swift. How can we forget about that, right? Changing economies everywhere she goes.
So I went to the Taylor Swift concert.
Oh, did you?
I'm going to go on like a little side track here, because I tried so hard to get tickets to her concert, right, in Sydney, and I absolutely couldn't. I tried everything. The day before her concert, someone messages me who I haven't spoken to for at least 10 years and goes, "Hey, I remember back in uni, you were a big Taylor Swift fan. If you still are, I've got COVID. I'm really sick. I'm not going to be able to go. Do you want my ticket?"
No way.
I got to go to Taylor Swift. I was 8 rows from the front.
Oh my God.
But like, it was worth it. And like, because I went in without any of the prep done, like there was no costumes, there was no friendship bracelets. And then this bouncer who would bounce, so the person who checks my ticket when I walk in, notices that I have no friendship bracelet, give me one of his. Nice. And so like, it was the best time. So wholesome.
Well, everyone who's been to a concert says the same thing. But I want to stick with politics, right? And they always say, don't talk about politics and religion, but we are going to go straight in there. And you're right. There's been like over 70 countries who've gone to the polls in 2024 and are voting. And I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on the types of governments we are electing, and are we seeing a real shift across the planet on, particularly with a new generation being able to vote, that people's expectations are shifting and changing?
This is a really hard question to answer. Like, if you asked me about 2 months ago, I would have been fairly confident. Now, not so much. So, like what we know with younger generations that they are more progressive and more small L liberal left-leaning. So over time in Australia, the likes of the Liberal Party, unless they look to reinvent themselves, will gradually lose relevance. But what we have seen sort of over the last 12 months is particularly post-COVID, and this is where sort of all of those geopolitical conflicts and everything tie into it, this big domestic agenda across the world where everyone sort of was at one point in time really focused around trading partners and international relations and how we work together, to all of a sudden, let's look after ourselves, let's protect ourselves, let's grow and manufacture our own products. Let's stop relying so much on other economies. And that's also then kind of translated to some pretty radical right-wing ideology as well. And so it's almost like it's given a little bit more permission for people who have some of those more extremist right-wing perspectives to have a voice and a platform, and for it to be, you know, accepted discourse where it probably wasn't a couple of years ago. And so, like, I was seeing the rise of the right wing and conservatives and nationalism, but then literally in the last week of us recording this podcast, we've seen the Tories have like one of the biggest ever losses to the left. And then also we saw France go to round 2 of their elections where the right wing was expected to dominate, and all of a sudden it didn't even go centrist, it went left again. And so for me, when I reflect on it, I think that we are still sitting more left to the right globally, but we're just seeing that voters are kind of just getting a little bit pissed off. Like they're starting to get sick of the people who have been governing, career politicians, which is why we've seen the rise of the Teal candidate in Australia, because they're intellectual people who have interesting careers, who aren't there necessarily for power or ego like the traditional politician is perceived to be. So I think we're going to see more independence. I think we're going to see more of these minorities. But yeah, we are seeing not apathy, but just a real level of disappointment in the political landscape and in our political leaders.
It's interesting you talk about the Teals in Australia in particular, and we saw that at the last election. So if we run down that thought, and we have more and more Teals come, or, you know, like you saw more recently, you had a Labor Party member who actually has left the party and gone. In the past, they'd cross the floor as such, and then, you know, I'm still a Labor member, but she's decided to become an independent. So if that continues, what does it mean for a 2-party system?
Yeah, like such a broad question. I mean, I think the way that politics is structured and tends to work is that it really does. In order for stuff to get done, we're sort of a little bit hamstrung around the 2-party system. I think it will still be the case for at least the next 10 years, but we will just start to see the rise of minorities and independents within politics, where those bigger players, the 2 parties, will need to make deals, will need to compromise, and will need to be a little bit more collegiate outside of the party room.
Let's talk about China. There's a number of things playing out in China, but the key issue there is their property crisis. How do you see that impacting Australia? You know, we have had situations in Australia in the past, and more pre-COVID, where we had a lot of Chinese coming in and buying property. We were taking parcels of land and marketing it in the Chinese marketplace, and we had a lot of investors coming in and buying property in Australia. They've got their own property crisis now. How do you think that's going to play out?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd be keen to get your views on that, because this is more your domain than mine. I think
Love that. Turn the question on the host.
Exactly. Well, but it is your field. I mean, in terms of how it's impacting, you know, the housing market and real estate domestically, like I'm keen to get your thoughts. What I'm seeing in terms of the impact of the property crash of sorts in China is that China has been growing quite aggressively as an economy. I think they actually still classify themselves as a developing nation, but they, within a couple of years, if not 12 months, will overtake the US. And so, you know, that they've, you know, been quite intentional in how they've tried to do that. But what we've seen is that with their sort of property market, as soon as that started to crumble, confidence started to crumble. We saw the forecasts get readjusted to be way more conservative and less aggressive. And it's going to have a massive impact on, just how much we see the Chinese economy grow, and therefore as one of the, if not the largest economy, then how that plays out more broadly. That's why we've also seen, I think, a little bit more willingness as far as sort of international trade and those relationships are concerned. I mean, in Australia, our relationship's sort of been thawing out for some time, a large part due to a new prime minister and government. But I think there's also been sort of the Chinese domestic agenda and quid pro quo for them as well.
I want to go back to what you mentioned earlier in your conversation about AI and the emergence of, ChatGPT and a whole range of other things. But in one of your recent reports that you did, I think maybe in the conversation you and I had pre this, you talked about ChatGPT, but you also talked about things like the metaverse, 3D printing, and robotics, and the impact it's happening on different industries around the world around that. So tell me more around that, because I understand ChatGPT because I use it. Probably not as well as I should, but I do use it. But, when people start talking to me about metaverse, I kind of go, what is that?
Yeah.
3D printing, I understand, and robotics, I understand. But maybe, share some of your thoughts on what will happen in those areas with us.
Let's start with 3D printing. So 3D printing, the size of the market for 3D printing is going to double in the next 5 years. And a lot of the time we think about 3D printers, sort of the very early versions that will like make little gimmicky toys or something. But what we're seeing as far as 3D printing is concerned is some really incredible applications of it. So in the future, in your home, you will have a 3D printer as a kitchen appliance because we can 3D print food. So you can 3D print like ingredients like chocolate or dough, but you can also 3D print entirely fully formed food products like burgers and pizzas and cakes and whatever. And so we'll see 3D printing chefs will be a new role that will start to emerge, which naturally isn't your traditional chef, but someone with a different set of skills. We're going to see more and more 3D printed buildings. So we're already seeing, for example, 3D printed houses. The first one was in Germany in 2022. And it took just 100 hours to 3D print all of the materials for a house. So this was the walls, the roof, the fireplace, the kitchen bench, the bathtub, everything. So we'll see, construction be impacted by 3D printing. And then in healthcare, one of the really cool things that I've seen is there's a company called Organovo that 3D prints like human organs for medical research purposes, so hearts and livers. But they've also 3D printed an ear for someone. So using their own tissue, they've biometrically printed an ear for them. And then that ear has been surgically attached to them.
Wow.
Someone is walking around with a 3D printed ear attached to them that's working as a fully functioning and looks like a fully functioning ear. So as far as 3D printing is concerned, it's definitely more than just little gadgets. There's some really incredible stuff that we're seeing in that space.
What is the metaverse?
So the next one then, the metaverse. So the metaverse is virtual worlds. So the way that people describe it is it's the next iteration of the internet. So the internet is where we...
And I'm just going to jump in there. Sorry, Ben, because people are actually selling real estate in the metaverse. Like they're actually selling a virtual piece of land.
Yeah. So it's massive, right? So yeah, if you think about like how do you get into the metaverse to begin with? So if you think about a computer, you log onto a computer and then you click on Chrome or Internet Explorer or whatever, and you go and you access the internet. Internet Explorer, I don't even think that exists anymore. So that's an outdated reference, Edge or whatever they called it. I'm a Mac person.
Right.
So you log onto the internet, that's how you access it. Soon enough, we'll be not doing that. We'll be moving into virtual environments, like with a VR headset, or they're already, researching how they can turn a VR headset into glasses and glasses into just contact lenses. But you would put this on and then you'll have what they call a virtual or spatial computer. So, holograms of computers and keyboards and everything will pop up. But essentially that's you then entering into the metaverse. And so if you think about how kids play video games, and they're going to Fortnite and all of that stuff, Roblox, that's in the metaverse. So virtual worlds that you can go and explore, but it's not just gaming. You'll get people there's a platform called Second Life where people if people know of The Sims, it's kind of that, but as an avatar where you just live another life in the metaverse. People work in the metaverse as their avatars as well. So companies have offices in the metaverse. But yeah, real estate is big. So there was recently a 700% growth in real estate in the metaverse. So we're talking virtual land. It doesn't exist in real life. The average plot of land is $76 per square meter or around $20,000. And so, I spoke about a 3D printing chef as like a new kind of job. A new kind of role will be a metaverse real estate agent.
Yeah.
And be like a 10-year-old who's working from a room in their parents' house.
Earning mega bucks doing it while he's doing it.
Yeah.
Out of all the things you just mentioned, all I'm looking forward to is a 3D printer in my kitchen that can actually give me whatever I want to cook, and I never have to ever cook again. That would
Well,
be, how far is that? How far is that?
well, you technically can get them now, but like they're not going to become mainstream, I reckon, for about 10 years or so.
Oh, so within my lifetime, that's all right. I'm okay with that.
But I'll one up you in terms of something you'll want in your home. So, like going then to robotics, in terms of what's happening in the robotic space, so we're starting to see plans to launch the first humanoid onto the market. So, a humanoid is a robot that looks like a human, so two arms, two legs, a head, etc. And there's this robot called Neo. So Neo is, or a humanoid, it's 167 centimeters tall. And like I have to say it because like there's no gender with robots, right?
No.
So 160 centimeters, 7 centimeters tall, weighs about 30 kilos, can run up to 12 kilometers an hour, lift 20 kilos. And Neo is going to be able to cook, can clean, do the washing, do the gardening, bring in the shopping.
Every woman's dream.
Yeah. So in the future, we will have humanoids, if you think about commercial real estate, they'll be doing, checking people in, they'll be, or a concierge role, they'll be doing cleaning, but then in our homes, we'll be having them as well.
But the impact on gender roles, Ben, think of that. A woman will still have a baby, but she can literally leave it behind with a humanoid if they're capable of that, of looking after them and go back to work. The gender roles would be massively impacted on.
Yeah, I mean, when you said that, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to leave my baby with a humanoid.
Why
But
not? We leave them in creches.
well, this is true. As I've watched too much sci-fi, I think.
You
There's
have.
a fear of like what happens if then like suddenly the humanoid turns. And if they're like cleaning my kitchen, well, if they turn big whoop. If they're looking after my kid, oh
But you could have a creche run by humanoids, but managed by one human as opposed to, I don't know. It's as soon as you said that, I was like, oh my God, women don't have to stay at home anymore. That was where my thought went first off.
well, but in any case, they'll be able to take, it might not be childcare, but it will
No,
be
but
on some kind of domestic duties. And I think you've kind of also touched on the point that, even if and as we will see humanoids and technology come more and more into work, they're not going to fully replace humans, probably because of the exact sort of apprehension that I had. There was in Japan, there's a hotel called the Hena Hotel, which has the Guinness World Record of being the first ever fully staffed robot hotel. And so everything was robots. There was no humans in there. But then soon enough, they actually had to make half the robots redundant and bring humans back into it because either robots couldn't do everything that humans could do, or the quality wasn't there, or it was just a pretty crappy customer experience for customers dealing with robots because we still crave relationships and face-to-face communication and building connection. And so, yeah, as much as we'll start to see this technology become more and more commonplace in our lives, the value of what makes us uniquely human won't go away. It'll just become more and more important. And that's why it will be us working with technology rather than being replaced by technology.
yeah. And I've always said that the technology is never going to replace us. It'll just work side by side with us. But what about regulation? How do we, in my industry, the regulation has always been way behind where the technology is right now. And everything that you've said so far, how do we keep everything regulated? Or do we need to?
We definitely need to. It's been really curious to watch how this has played out with AI because I think a lot of the time, the regulation wasn't playing catch up to the extent that it is now. Like it was always sort of relatively keeping par because we were sort of going through step change as opposed to like uniform transformation. And so what we saw with AI, right, was, the US government was holding an inquiry not long after OpenAI launched because they're like, hang on, what is this? We're not prepared for this. You saw the likes of Elon Musk and Steve Wozniak from Apple come out and say, we need to put a 6-month ban on developing AI and just hold for the next 6 months, which was never going to happen. But that just shows the level of concern around how far behind the regulation is. I think if it can sort of serve as a bit of a warning to say governments really need to step up in this space. They have, not been on the front foot. They haven't been thinking about it, and they haven't been sufficiently engaging with industry enough, who need to have a seat at the table and who want a seat at the table. Like, you've got Sam Altman from OpenAI, who is wanting to and very open to having these conversations and working with the US government. We just need to see more and more of that, but also anticipating it. So where I'm talking about humanoids, they're not, part of our lives now, but they will. So why aren't we having conversations around what the regulatory framework and sort of the ethical uses and considerations look like, and how we make sure it's used for good rather than sort of some of the harmful ways in which it can manifest?
Just shifting again a little bit, I want to talk about climate change and renewable energy.
This is why I was worried, because look at all these different tangents you're going on.
I do this all the time with my guests. I do this all the time with my guests. Have you not listened to my podcast?
No, but we've got like politics and technology and now climate change.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting stuff. And this is a big conversation in Australia, right? Because we've committed to being net zero by 2050. 78% of our homes are nowhere near being, anywhere being net zero, with insulation and windows still bringing in drafts, and the way we've built the homes, etc., the amount of heating we use, drafts, all that sort of stuff, and we've got a lot of work to do in this space. And then you've got the opposition leader talking about nuclear energy, which is an interesting conversation in itself. How do you see the next sort of 5 or 10 years playing out as we work really hard to get to our net zero goals?
Yep. So this will be one where the next election will play a big role in this. So we'll have an election in the next 12 months. If it's Labor, it's very much around renewables. If it's Liberal, they will try to push nuclear. And why I say try, because we know that it's their platform and agenda. But legally, we can't have nuclear energy in Australia. Like the Howard government put in laws. There are state-based laws as well. So even if at a federal level they were to overhaul the legislation, state-wise, there are several states where you can't have nuclear reactors and nuclear power. So I just don't know how. I think it's more of a political play than anything. I don't know how it can actually happen. And again, the modelling has come out and said that it actually isn't more cost effective, despite what the Liberal Party has said. And so I just don't see nuclear being the way that we will get to net zero in Australia. There might come a time in the future where we do see nuclear play a role, because there are a lot of countries that do have nuclear, but it is not the dominant energy source, and it's just sort of one of several. And so there's that. I think as far as sort of we're seeing here, we're seeing a big investment around solar. From a consumer perspective, you see a lot around solar. Globally, hydrogen, like hydropower, is the biggest. So we'll start to see more and more of that here, and we're seeing the likes of Snowy Hydro 2.0 and others. Will we get to net zero? The Labor government is optimistic that we will within those timeframes. I think we'll give it a fair crack, but I'm also not sure that we're entirely there yet, because the Labor Party are also trying to balance the push for renewables with representing the unions and the working class, and we are quite a coal-dependent country. I'm optimistic, as is the Labor Party, but I'm not sure if we'll get there in the sort of timeframes that we've put out.
Part of this whole climate change conversation, which I find fascinating, is the desire to move towards artificial food. So artificial meat is a big one, right? And yeah. I heard the other day, I don't know whether you heard this or not, but as I was reading something or listening to something on the radio where they're saying they're looking at genetically changing cattle so that they don't emit as much gas as they do. So it has a lower impact on the climate. And I was like, okay, that's pretty cool, but how far away is that? Now, I don't know about you, but I've tried the artificial meats in the not meat as such in the supermarkets, the chicken and the whatever else there, and it's horrible. Like, I can't, and maybe it's because I psychologically know that I'm not eating chicken and I don't like it, but that is the future, isn't it? Because there is going to come a time when we are going to have to accept the fact that we're eating something different to what we actually ate 20 years ago.
Yeah, we've seen a lot in terms of like imitation meat, which is the stuff you're talking about. So where you're seeing soy and, based products and mushroom-based products, and we've got Quorn as one of the key brands there, and Impossible Burgers. But what we're starting to see and what will hit the shelves in Australia within the next 12 months is what they call lab-grown meat. And so that is meat that is grown in a lab. So basically now if you think about pork, you basically get a pig, sorry to be graphic, you have to kill it, cut it up, and then you sell it as pork chops or bacon or sausages or whatever. What you would do with lab grown meat is you would take cells from, say, a pig's ear. That pig then goes back into the paddock and keeps running around and playing in mud. And then using that, they would be able to actually cultivate and grow pork meat in a lab. And so that way there's none of those sort of environmental impacts that come from raising cattle and herds and whatnot. But the meat itself is said to have the same taste, texture, and appearance as traditional meat. And there's like videos you can look at online because it's already been cleared and been underway and being sold in Singapore. The US recently got approval for lab grown chicken, and there are a couple of other examples around the world. And yeah, you can watch people do blind taste tests where they genuinely can't tell
the difference.
And I'm talking like food judges as well. I watched one where the majority of them picked the lab grown meat as being the real deal. So I think that's what we're going to see a little bit more and more of. And we're seeing synthetic dairy, which is like lab grown or lab made dairy products as well. So things that, will not be like fake chicken, which we call chicken, but it really isn't. It will be things that is chicken or is, milk, but it just, an animal wasn't harmed in producing it.
My mind went straight away to imagine how much land we're going to potentially free up then, and farming is going to change because, I live part of my time in Gippsland here in Victoria, and I'm surrounded by hundreds and hundreds of acres of land, which has got cattle on it. But you go down that path, which is not that far away, and suddenly all that land frees up either for housing or it frees up for a different kind of produce for us to grow and export or use internally.
Yeah, I mean, so that's definitely one of the other sort of things that comes with it. There's obviously like really big ethical benefits from moving away from it as well. I think where the sort of I guess you could say resistance. I mean, part of the resistance is people still going, that's gross, I don't want to eat lab grown meat. But, let's not knock it until we try it. But is this idea that, well, are we going to be putting, farmers and generations of farming families out of work? And I think, my background is around work and workforces, and it always comes back to that for me. And so I think it's the right path to sort of go down. But similar to when we were talking about transitioning from coal mining to renewables, or if we're talking about going from traditional agriculture to a new way within which we grow and cultivate meat and dairy, we have to be we need to be planning for this decades in advance, and we need to be working with the farmers or the workers around what that transition looks like and bring them to the conversation and have a seat at the table. And so, I think that it will free up farmland. There'll be ethical benefits, there'll be environmental benefits, because we know that sort of the meat industry is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. But we've got to think about the people who are impacted by all of this as well.
Talking about, you mentioned before that, you come from the looking at workforces and what the future of that looks like. I want to talk about post-COVID. We've all moved into this hybrid world of work. We've got a very dispersed work environment, which is, really difficult for leaders to lead. We've got a whole new generation in the workplace that don't like talking to anybody, have a different way of communicating. How do you see this sort of new world playing out, particularly for leaders? A lot of my listeners are CEOs, leaders in business. And I think one of our biggest challenges at the moment is the dispersed workplace, and, keeping the connection, keeping the culture, keeping the accountability, keeping connected with, walking the floor. I love walking the floor. I love, talking to people because it's how I stay connected to them. But that world seems to be changing every day around how we work. So how's the next few years going to play out in that?
Firstly, I just want to call out great podcast hosting, because you've managed to do a segue from artificial meat and farming to hybrid working. So
you said something that made me jump there.
Well done to you. So how do I see it sort of playing out? Look, I think we've been talking about hybrid working for a while, right? So I might just start there. I think that hybrid working is here to stay. I don't think, for the majority of people who have the ability to work between home and the office, I think that the vast majority will stay working at least one day a week from home, which is hybrid. right? So the amount of time we're going into the office has been increasing since lockdown sort of measures lifted. I think it will get to around 3.5 to 4 days a week in the office. And we're almost there, by the way. And then the rest will still be having that flexibility to work from home, or an alternative space. And so I think that's part of it. And that is a real challenge for leaders in terms of, well, how do you make sure that we still, as you said, stay connected, we maintain team culture? That's where it's really important for leaders to have conversations around setting expectations. What are the moments that matter for where we have to all be co-located in the one place at the one time? And that could be a weekly team meeting. That could be 9 a.m. every single day, 5 days a week. But then afternoons, you have more flexibility. It could be once a month for a town hall meeting, whatever that looks like. It's going to be different for every team. And so I think that sort of, we need to bring it back to that team level. I don't agree with organizational wide mandates that assume that everyone works the same and has the same sort of impacts on their work and when they work and why they work. Like, I don't get it. And the other thing that sort of frustrates me with the whole conversation is when you look at an organization's balance sheet, the average organization spends about 10% of their costs on their office and about 60% on their people. But what happens is they go, oh, I've locked myself into a lease and I really want to make sure I get my value for money. So everyone come into the office. And I'm like, why are we trying to optimize the 10% on our balance sheet rather than optimize the 60%, which is how do your people work best and then enable them? So that might be coming into the office every single day, but it might be not coming into the office at all. And so I just think there's these sort of hard lines that leaders have been applying, partly because as well, this is a really bloody challenging environment for leaders. Like, not just when it comes to hybrid working and where we work, but we're seeing Gen Z come into the workforce. They'll occupy 20 to 25% of all workers within the next couple of years. And they have very different expectations. So there's that as well. There's AI and the impact of technology. There's the market conditions. There's the fact that we've seen rising cost of living and declining wage growth. And so they're getting pressure from staff around salaries. So there's all this stuff that's being thrown at them. And so it is very easy for them to say, you know what, one thing that is in my control is around where people work. And if I can just get people back to the office and sitting in front of me, that makes my job a bit easier because I know that they're working. I know that they're connecting. I don't have to solve for all of that other stuff. So hopefully we start to see the dial shift there because, as I said, hybrid working is here to stay. Stop resisting it. We have to solve it. But I do really empathize with leaders who are trying to deal with that because, as I said, it is a really challenging landscape for them.
My last question for you, it's not a segue or a jump, but what do you see as in store for us for 2025?
Oh, 2025.
Do you hate that question? Do you get
A
asked
little
that all
bit
the
because
time?
I get asked all the time, but I always change my
You
view.
answer?
And
That's okay.
every
You can
time
do
I
that here
answer that,
too.
it's like it's going to be wrong. What's in store for 2025? I mean, I think this is where we're going to start to see, again, it comes back to artificial intelligence for me. We're going to see it move from being technology to being something that's fully embedded in how we do business. It will reshape how organizations define their operating models. We're going to really start to see the acceleration of smart industries as well. So not just agriculture, but ag tech, or not just the food industry, but food tech and those sorts of industries. Like if you look at even the latest release of ChatGPT 4.0, you can do things like real-time language translation on calls. You can do if you think about a Zoom meeting where everyone has a window on a screen, you've got AI that occupies one of those windows and is like a virtual team member. And I think that's where we're going to start to see things progressing. We don't think about it as AI that's just observing the meeting, but I would say, hey, AI, we're having a disagreement about X and Y. Can you help us reach a consensus? What do you think? And AI will jump in and do that. And so I think, moving from it being, I spoke about it earlier, moving from a gimmick to how we embed it into organizations. I think next year is the year where that really starts to take off. I wouldn't make a prediction, but I just think the political landscape is going to have a massive impact, and whatever happens in that US election is going to sway things one way or another, and internationally and here in Australia as well. It's hard because I still feel like we'll be dealing with a lot of the same challenges. We'll still be dealing with cost of living. Inflation should start to ease up. Interest rates should hopefully start to ease back down. If that happens,
soon enough before the election, the Australian election, then that looks very good for Labor. So if that might then be a blessing in disguise for Anthony Albanese, because the timelines look like they might actually line up with when we start to get a bit of relief. But we will still see things like cost of living be on the radar. And then I think the other thing that I'm just seeing more of that we'll see, again, just get bigger and bigger, is this whole piece around consumer and employee activism. So people who are taking to TikTok and other platforms to call out bad behavior, toxic workplaces, brands that they've had negative experiences with, those new types of media as well. We're not talking about a review on a website. We're talking about a video that goes viral. And so I think we're going to, see a little bit more in that activism space, which when you think about ESG, so environment, social governance, it's really sitting in that social space. Because, if we look at sort of the Met Gala, celebrities like Taylor Swift lost over 200,000 followers overnight because they're like, why are you having this big platform, even though she wasn't at the Met Gala, but why are you having this big platform and yet you're not calling out the stuff to do with Israel and Palestine? And celebrities at the Met Gala, why were you posting photos and, glorifying your lives when the lives of others who are far worse off, why aren't you using your platform appropriately? And so that's just the start. When we talked at the very start around signals and trends and the role of a futurist, that's the signal where I look at and I'm like, that's only going to get more profiled and amplified in the next year or two.
What a conversation. Thank
There
you.
was a lot in there.
we did it. We talked a lot. We talked about, and I could keep talking to you, but we've only got 1 hour.
Well, I'm hopeful that it was at least because it was so broad. Like, hopefully, some part of it was interesting to someone.
Yeah. Well, no, but it will be very interesting. I like to keep my conversations broad because we cover more. But now, how can people connect with you? Because clearly, you speak professionally and very interesting topics. I'd love to put you on stage for now and just throw questions at you, which is what I've done right now. But how do people connect with you?
So on LinkedIn, so Dr. Ben Hamer, you can find me there. I have a Instagram page that I curate as well. So thinkatank.lab on Instagram, where it's all sorts of different trends, stuff that I've talked about now, but also things like how, for example, we've just seen a rise in toy sales in the US, and it's being driven by adults who are buying more toys for themselves than preschoolers. And so also some lighthearted stuff to balance things out. So thinkatank.lab on Instagram, or otherwise I have a podcast called the Think a Tank Podcast as well. And again, each episode once a week, 10 minutes, just explores a different trend, and with the intention of making you a little bit smarter or the most interesting person at your next dinner party.
Brilliant. Well, we should all follow that one. Thank you so much for your time. I've loved our conversation, and maybe we can do this as an annual podcast between the two of us, where we look at the year that's been and the year that's coming.
Well, I might do a little bit more research, so I'm not so stumped when you ask me about next year next time.
You weren't stumped at all. That was all very good. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
If you like what you've heard, please share, rate and review this podcast. And don't forget to share it with anyone who might benefit from hearing it. The producer of Future Fit Leadership is Maritza Barone from Guide Your Light Network. If you would like to reach out to me, please DM me on any of my social media platforms. I'm available for speaking at conferences or consulting to your business. Future Fit is created in partnership with Future Leadership, a capability ecosystem for boards and executives. If you'd like to join the community and receive a free takeaway each week, sign up to the Future Exchange app in my show notes. Thank you for having me in your space.
This is a Guide Your Light Network production, creating podcasts with purpose.